People's Temple. Jim Jones founded the People's Temple in Indianapolis in the early 1950s. He blended progressive rhetoric, racial integration, food distribution, job help, with charismatic preaching, which built local credibility and a diverse following. Over time, Jones recast himself from pastor to infallible leader, claiming prophetic insight and exclusive moral authority. He isolated members from outside relationships and framed the world as hostile. In 1977, he relocated the temple to a remote Guyana settlement called Jonestown, where roughly 900 people lived under tight control. Regulated food, fixed schedules, censored communications, armed guards, and nightly indoctrination. White nights, drills rehearsing mass suicide, normalized collective death as a test of loyalty. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan visited with journalists and relatives to investigate abuse claims. When several residents sought to leave with him, temple gunmen ambushed Ryan at a nearby airstrip. He and 4 others were killed. Jones then declared the attack a point of no return and organized a mass poisoning. Members, including children, were forced or coerced to drink a cyanide-laced, grape-flavored beverage. Armed guards enforced compliance. Over 900 people died, including Jones. Jonestown demonstrates how isolation, leader worship, and complete informational control can escalate to mass coercion and death. Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate began in the early 1970s when Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles combined Christian imagery with UFO and New Age beliefs. They taught that the Earth was about to be recycled, and that selected souls would ascend to a higher plane aboard extraterrestrial craft. Applewhite and Nettles presented themselves as the chosen guides, preparing followers for this transition. Members adopted communal living, celibacy, minimal possessions, and strict obedience. They severed family ties and took new uniform names to erase past identities. Several male members even underwent castration to suppress sexual desire. After Nettles' death in 1985, Applewhite reframed her passing as proof that physical death could be transcended and emphasized that the next level required shedding the human body. In March 1997, Applewhite interpreted the Hale-Bopp comet as the arrival of the spacecraft. 39 members in Rancho Santa Fe, California, conducted a coordinated voluntary suicide by ingesting barbiturates mixed with alcohol in organized shifts. They dressed identically, used purple shrouds, and left recorded statements explaining their belief that death equaled ascension. The incident shows how tightly controlled doctrine, ritualized practice, and charismatic reinterpretation of events produced a carefully staged collective suicide. Aum Shinrikyo. Founded in Japan in 1984 by Shoko Asahara, Aum Shinrikyo mixed Buddhist and Hindu elements with apocalyptic Christianity and Asahara's personal revelations. He claimed divine status and prophesied imminent global catastrophe. The group drew professionals, doctors, engineers, scientists, and grew rapidly. Initially presented as spiritual training, Aum militarized its established compounds, trained members under extreme conditions using sensory and sleep deprivation, pursued chemical and biological research. Asahara preached that a global Armageddon, possibly instigated by the United States, was coming, and framed violence as either defensive or accelerative. On March 20th, 1995, Aum executed a coordinated sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway during morning rush hour. Liquid sarin released on multiple trains vaporized, killing 13 people and injuring thousands. The attack prompted sweeping raids, arrests, and exposure of additional plots, including plans to weaponize anthrax. Asahara and key leaders were convicted and ultimately executed in 2018. Aum is a clear example of a religious movement that became a terrorist organization through technological capability, hierarchical secrecy, and absolutist ideology. Order of the Solar Temple. The Order of the Solar Temple was founded in 1984 by Joseph D. Mambro and Luc Jouret, blending New Age spirituality, Templar symbolism, and apocalyptic Christianity. D. Mambro managed doctrine and finances, while Jouret served as the charismatic recruiter. Members were told they were reincarnated spiritual elites destined to transit to a higher realm near the star Sirius. The group operated secret lodges in Europe and Canada. Ritual, theatrical staging, and symbolic regalia reinforced leader authority. Members donated heavily and accepted hierarchical control. Leaders framed death as a privileged passage rather than loss. Between 1994 and 1997, coordinated deaths occurred. On October 4th to 5th, 1994, 48 members were found dead in Switzerland and Canada. Some drugged, some shot, many arranged in ritual settings. Fires were used to destroy evidence. Further killings followed in France and Quebec. Investigators concluded that leadership orchestrated many of the deaths to fulfill apocalyptic doctrine and preserve secrecy. Total fatalities reached approximately 74. The Solar Temple case shows how ritualized, hierarchy, financial exploitation, and apocalyptic claims can culminate in planned, collective death. Movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. This Ugandan movement emerged in the late 1980s as a Catholic breakaway, led by Credonia Murinda and Joseph Kibwetera. They claimed visions of the Virgin Mary and demanded strict adherence to the Ten Commandments as the only path to salvation. The movement enforced extreme austerity, communal living, fasting, silence, or restricted speech, and sexual abstinence. Leaders prophesied an imminent apocalypse around the millennium. When December 31st, 1999, passed uneventfully, leaders postponed the date to March 17th, 2000. On that day, more than 500 adherents gathered in a locked church for a farewell feast, and the building was set on fire. All inside died. Subsequent investigations uncovered mass graves, poisonings, stranglings, and evidence that many victims were murdered rather than consenting. The total death toll exceeded 900, making this one of the largest cult-related mass killings. The movement highlights how apocalyptic promises, economic control, and violent enforcement by leaders can produce mass murder under the guise of salvation. Branch Davidians. The Branch Davidians evolved from a Seventh-day Adventist offshoot and took on a distinct apocalyptic theology. Vernon Howell, who renamed himself David Koresh, assumed leadership in the 1980s and claimed prophetic authority, including exclusive interpretation of Revelation. Koresh consolidated doctrinal, sexual, and practical control at the Mount Carmel compound near Waco, Texas. He declared many women his spiritual wives, including underage girls, and stockpiled weapons, citing an imminent apocalypse. Federal investigations focused on alleged weapons violations and child abuse. On February 28, 1993, an ATF attempt to execute a search warrant led to a gun battle that killed 4 agents and 6 Davidians. That initiated a 51-day FBI standoff. Negotiations and delays ended on April 19, 1993, when an FBI operation using tear gas was followed by a fast-moving fire that destroyed the compound. 76 Branch Davidians died, including Koresh and many children. Causes included smoke inhalation and gunshot wounds. The siege raised contentious questions about law enforcement tactics, religious freedom, apocalyptic violence, and how authoritarian religious leadership combined with weapon stockpiling can end in mass death. Children of God. David Berg founded the Children of God in 1968, attracting young people with promises of communal living and prophetic identity. Berg, who styled himself Moses David, demanded absolute loyalty and instituted radical outreach tactics. The movement's most notorious practice was flirty fishing, which encouraged sexual relations by female members to recruit converts. Children raised in the group experienced limited formal education, intense indoctrination, and isolation. Former members and internal documents revealed widespread sexual abuse, including of minors, justified by distorted theology and authority claims. Facing legal and public scrutiny in the 1980s and 1990s, the group rebranded as the Family International in 1994 and renounced some practices publicly. However, structural problems in leadership influence persisted, and many allegations of abuse remain part of its history. The case demonstrates how sexual exploitation and intergenerational trauma can be institutionalized under charismatic leadership and doctrinal distortion. The Manson family. Charles Manson recruited disaffected youth in late 1960s California with promises of spiritual awakening and communal living. He used drugs, psychological manipulation, and charismatic authority to control followers and claimed prophetic significance. Manson interpreted Beatles lyrics, especially the White Album, as coded signs predicting an imminent racial apocalypse he called Helter Skelter. Manson planned to spark a race war by committing shock murders he expected to be blamed on black Americans. In August 1969, he ordered the murder of Sharon Tate and 4 others. The next night, the LaBianca murders followed. Messages written in blood at the scenes were intended to inflame racial tensions. Manson and several followers were convicted in 1971. Death sentences were later commuted to life. The Manson family became a cultural shorthand for violent cult manipulation, illustrating how apocalyptic myth-making, charismatic control, and ideological extremism can drive followers to commit brutal acts. Penza Cave, Doomsday Group. In 2007, a splinter sect led by Pyotr Kuznetsov barricaded itself in a cave near Nikolskoye, Penza region, claiming the world would end in May 2008. Kuznetsov forbade television, radio, processed food, and money, labeling them tools of the Antichrist, and instructed followers to isolate underground. Conditions in the cave deteriorated. Cold, stale air, poor sanitation, and structural instability. Kuznetsov remained above ground to manage logistics and was later hospitalized and diagnosed with schizophrenia. The group refused medical care, leading to 2 deaths from untreated illness. Foul conditions and collapsing passageways drove partial evacuations. Remaining members emerged in stages by March 2008, just weeks before the predicted end date. No mass violence occurred, but the episode shows how isolationist doomsday beliefs and leader delusion can create life-threatening environmental and health risks, even without intentional killing. Found this useful? Like the video, subscribe for more hard-hitting explainers, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next outlier.